This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington, and we are coming on the air with historic news. For the first time ever in American history, a former president of the United States has been indicted. This unprecedented case against Trump will have wide-ranging implications. This indictment, filed under seal by the Manhattan DA, could be announced in the coming days. It would also mean that Donald Trump would be asked to surrender and face arraignment on charges yet to be announced. It is all related to the hush money payment made to former porn star Stormy Daniels. Let's bring in our chief election campaign correspondent, Robert Costa, who broke this news for us here at CBS and has been talking to his sources. What have you learned?
Good to be with you, Nora. This is a historic moment to have a former president indicted. This has been confirmed to CBS News by Trump's own attorney, Susan Nicholas. She has told CBS News the former president has been indicted. This is about hush money payments made in 2016 by his former fixer, Michael Cohen, to Stormy Daniels, the porn star. Under scrutiny is former President Trump's role in this entire operation. They've been talking to witnesses extensively in recent months, focusing especially on Michael Cohen and his testimony about Trump's role in this entire episode. Bob Costello, the former witness, one of the former lawyer for Trump, he has testified in recent weeks about this entire matter. He just told CBS News minutes ago that he will be, if there's a trial, someone who questions Cohen's credibility. So this could be a tough case for the district attorney in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, to make, but he believes the evidence is there. And sources tell CBS News that Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, is not just relying on Michael Cohen's testimony, that he has been slowly and methodically building a case based on financial documents, personal correspondence, to tell a broader story, not just about Stormy Daniels, but about other so-called catch-and-kill operations to stop stories seen as unsavory from being published during the presidential campaign.
Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney, will now negotiate with Trump's lawyers to negotiate this surrender. Could that mean that the former president of the United States will be photographed and fingerprinted in the bowels of a New York State courthouse?
Yes, while this is a highly unusual, historic situation, our sources in the Manhattan district attorney's office and operations say that the former president would be brought in like anyone else who was indicted. We will see him surrender to authorities. Exactly how that plays out could be negotiated in terms of whether there's a so-called perp walk or seeing the former president in handcuffs. But he will be fingerprinted regardless of any negotiation, and there will be an arraignment in open court.
The only difference in terms of how other people would be treated, of course, Donald Trump will have his Secret Service in tow. Quite an extraordinary moment just to imagine all of that. We don't know at this hour what the specific charges are, correct?
That's correct. We do not know the scope of this indictment. We do know that the district attorney has been looking into trying to broaden potentially the scope of an indictment. Because in terms of the financial crimes here, if you just expense something on an expense report, that could be a misdemeanor. So what we've seen in recent weeks is the district attorney trying to see if this indictment, if it ever came, now it has come, would be something that would be a collection of misdemeanors that would rise to a felony level. And so you see Trump now, we expect, based on our reporting, he's being indicted at a felony level for financial crimes based on how this payment was made and how it was communicated.
A former president of the United States, for the first time in history, has been indicted, will face criminal charges. We don't know the specifics of those charges. As Robert Costa has just outlined, already Trump's attorneys saying this is a mistake on behalf of the prosecutor.
But to be clear, this wasn't just the prosecutor's decision. The way this works is the Manhattan district attorney will come to the grand jury, a group of people who have been listening to all of the evidence and all of the testimony, and he will seek an indictment from them. So this is the grand jury's decision to move forward with an indictment, believing enough evidence is there to indict this person, in this case, a former president of the United States.
I also want to bring in our senior investigative correspondent, Catherine Herridge. She has also been speaking with her sources. Catherine, what have you learned?
About the development with the grand jury in New York. Seemed a little off balance by the question, though he acknowledged they had been anticipating this development and had a plan in place if that were to be the case, but he was checking back to see what the next steps were going forward. Just for some larger context, of course, there are about a half dozen investigations that involve the former president. This one, of course, has come to the fore with the grand jury in New York, but there are a number of state and federal investigations as well, specifically the special counsel looking at the alleged mishandling of classified information after President Trump left office. And then, of course, the Georgia case, which has gained a lot of steam in recent weeks. That's the allegation that the former president was looking for about 11,000 votes around the time of the November election. So you have this whole collection of cases, but this one really coming to the fore, and in some ways unexpectedly, it would seem, based on my conversation with one of the president's former attorneys.
Catherine Herridge, thank you. I want to go back to Robert Costa, and on that point, this vote to indict the former president of the United States, this caps a nearly 5-year investigation into Donald Trump. It comes just as he has launched a new race for president of the United States.
It's highly complicated for this district attorney because he's prosecuting on a city level a crime that he believed was allegedly committed, all while someone runs for federal office. And this case originally started as a federal investigation of how this money was paid during 2016 to see if there were any federal crimes committed during a presidential campaign. It is migrated to this level, to the city level. And this has been a highly controversial unfolding case for many years. You think about Mark Pomerantz, the former prosecutor in New York, resigned his position because he believed Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, was not moving quickly enough on this case, on a possible indictment. The former district attorney in New York, Cyrus Vance, decided not to indict Trump. Now Alvin Bragg moving forward with an indictment, seeking this indictment from the grand jury. And it's the grand jury's decision to move forward. Trump's lawyers have told CBS News repeatedly they will negotiate in terms of how this all plays out in terms of an arrest, should it happen. Now that it has happened, look for Joe Tacopina and Susan Nicholas, the Trump lawyers, to really go minute by minute how this will unfold, how he will come up from Florida or off the campaign trail to come to Lower Manhattan. I mean, Lower Manhattan, Nora, is right where they film Law and Order. I mean, this is where Law and Order exists in the city of New York. Police officers everywhere. It's been highly populated in recent weeks. I've been there standing on the street corner reporting for a long time. All the cops in Lower Manhattan in full uniform because they're wary of what could happen in terms of protests. The former president called for protests. He had the expectation of an arrest and he called for protests. So there's real unease. A lot of officers on edge in New York about what could happen when Trump comes in to be fingerprinted and ultimately arraigned.
Robert Costa, thank you. And that's the picture that we are showing right there. That is the district attorney's office, I am told. And of course, Alvin Bragg has now become a national figure himself, as the former president has, in some ways, incited violence, has made Bragg a potential target. Security has been ramped up for the district attorney there in New York, as he is now the first prosecutor to lead an indictment of Donald Trump. I do think it's important to remember that Donald Trump has been twice indicted.
Well, twice impeached.
Excuse me, twice impeached, forgive me, and acquitted as well. He has faced numerous charges in the past, political charges of wrongdoing, and yet he has escaped accountability. This indictment is the next stage in trying to, according to those who believe he has committed wrongdoing, of holding him accountable.
And it's so revealing that this indictment, out of all of the legal challenges he has faced, the political challenges he has faced in Congress, it's ultimately his history as a business person, as a celebrity, his time in New York that suddenly comes to the fore at this stage of his life and his career. It's his association with David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, about these alleged associations with various women, about hush money payments made by his fixer, Michael Cohen, that of all the things we've covered over the years about Donald Trump, about his real estate life, about his political life, the Russia investigation, January 6th, and insurrection, the indictment that came today, an indictment that's historic, is about New York. It's about hush money. It's about his life before the presidency.
Let's bring in CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman. And Ricky, indicting a former president is unprecedented. Could this legally prevent Trump from running for president?
No. The fact that he may be indicted now in the county of New York, within the state of New York, which is Manhattan, does not have any effect whatsoever upon his running for president, nor does it have any effect whatsoever if he were to win the presidency. It is not that kind of a charge. Now, if he does become the president again, and he has been convicted of a felony, then the question may become one of impeachment. And of course, we do know this is a state charge, Nora. It is very different than a federal charge because he could not pardon himself if he became president of the United States again. He could only do that for a federal offense. So then the question would be, if you're looking at a possible impeachment, and now I'm like 3 layers ahead, you would be looking at—
Let's not go there yet. Let's talk about the actual case at hand and what may be. We don't know what the specifics of this indictment are. But what are some of the potential criminal charges that the president could face? Former president.
Well, as I say, is it a high crime or a misdemeanor? Some of the potential charges that he might be facing, we are led to believe, have to do with what Bob Costa was just talking about. It has to do with the payment of hush money to Stormy Daniels back in 2016, before the election. It may have to do with the payment of hush money to a former Playboy playmate, Karen McDougal, around the same time. And the reason that Alvin Bragg could go forward and ask a grand jury to indict on first misdemeanors, falsifying business records, that there were records within the Trump organization of paying back Michael Cohen, who footed the bill to pay Stormy Daniels, and the records themselves false entries about legal services against a retainer. How Alvin Bragg would ask a grand jury to up that to a felony would have to do with the fact that it may have been to conceal another crime, which would have been a federal campaign violation. There has never been a case like this. It is a novel theory, a unique theory. And the real question ultimately may be for a judge, or perhaps even an appellate court, of whether or not this theory will stand.
Among the routine steps of a felony arrest processing in New York include being fingerprinted, being photographed, maybe even being handcuffed. Read your standard Miranda rights. Will that happen to Donald Trump?
It will happen to Donald Trump, but not the way it usually happens. It will happen as it happens with many white-collar criminals, where they are allowed to surrender by themselves, that is, with their lawyers. Donald Trump will also be surrendering by arrangement with the district attorney's office, and he will be surrounded by his Secret Service agents, as he always is, because he is entitled to that protection as a former president. So, yes, he will be processed. He will have a mugshot. He will get a booking number. He will give fingerprints, albeit electronically rather than by ink. And ultimately, whether or not he will be handcuffed is a discretionary decision for the police, in this case, the NYPD. If he's with Secret Service people, there is no need to handcuff him, to bring him into the courtroom to be arraigned.
Our legal analyst, Ricky Kleeman, want to bring back in Robert Costa as we are talking about this historic moment. The former president of the United States, Donald Trump, indicted on this Thursday by a grand jury in New York after what is a nearly 5-year-long investigation. What does this mean for the former president? What does it mean in terms of his supporters? What does it mean in terms of the protests that he has called from? We're at an interesting moment right now.
A very interesting moment. In fact, I just got off the phone a few minutes ago with a Republican donor, and he said that all the major donors in this country have been quiet for a long time, waiting to see if an indictment would come. Why hasn't Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin got into the race yet, or Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? Of course, they're taking their time on a decision, but they all knew this variable existed in the Republican political space. Would Trump actually be indicted in New York, and how would voters respond, not just nationally, but especially within the Republican Party? We are at a crossroads politically right now. Will other Republicans, now seeing Trump potentially humbled politically, maybe in terms of his popularity, from an indictment decide to get in. But others are waiting to see, does this give him more fuel for his own 2024 presidential campaign? Just at his latest campaign rally, he has been using his grievances about all of this legal scrutiny to propel him ahead in the Republican presidential polls. And his closest allies tell CBS News he believes this will only help him to consolidate his support.
It's interesting what you said about some of the other bigwigs in the Republican Party that have yet to enter the presidential race. And yet this is considered perhaps the weakest of some of the other legal cases that the former president is facing, including one on the attack of January 6th, his efforts to overturn the election results in Georgia, and third, those classified documents in Mar-a-Lago. Many legal experts saying those are weightier than this New York case. And yet, because of the significance of what has just happened, the question is, will those Republicans on Capitol Hill stop defending the president? Up to this point, Robert, they have said that this is a liberal district attorney in Manhattan who is out of line.
It's hard to see which Republicans will suddenly break from Trump because of an indictment in New York. But you are spot on, Nora. This is a legal and political explosion today to have a former president indicted in the city of New York. But there's an ongoing federal grand jury on January 6th. There's an ongoing federal grand jury on Trump's handling of classified materials. And there's a special grand jury that just finished in Georgia investigating Trump's conduct after the 2020 election. Especially in Georgia, Trump allies feel that Fani Willis, the DA down there, she could move forward with her own indictment of Trump at some point in the coming weeks. We've spoken to Trump's lawyers in Georgia. They are unsure exactly what the district attorney will do. And Jack Smith, the special counsel, he is bringing in every possible Trump ally to testify, even going so far as to try to compel the former vice president of the United States, Mike Pence, to testify before a grand jury about his one-on-one private conversations with Trump.
Robert Costa, thank you. Let's also bring in our senior investigative correspondent, Catherine Herridge, who I know has been speaking with her sources. Catherine, what have you learned?
Well, Nora, a short time ago, I spoke with a longtime aide to the former president. He said that they're waiting to learn more about the actual charges in the indictment, but they're taking in what he described a fighting posture. They indicated that they believe the Manhattan district attorney had not acted properly or acted improperly in this case, and they're going to seek to find whether records, substantial and significant records, were withheld from this grand jury in their decision-making process. So that seems to be their legal posture heading into the next few days, a fighting posture, if you will, Nora.
But that wouldn't overturn an indictment.
No, but it shows that they're digging in terms of trying to push back against the charges, which you would anticipate with this former president.
Catherine Herridge, thank you. And Robert Costa, at this moment, we've not yet heard from Donald Trump. Is that correct?
We have not heard from Trump other than hearing from his own lawyers, who have said that he has been indicted. So they've acknowledged it, but Trump has not yet spoken out on his social media platform. But we don't expect him to be quiet.
All right, let's bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett, who is also with us. And Major is someone who has covered Donald Trump for a long time and watched the political machinations. This is incredibly significant. Your take?
So, Nora, the great question would be, in America, does the rule of law apply universally? And does it apply in the case of a former president? That has been hanging over the country psychologically for the last week and a half, after President Trump said he was going to be arrested last Tuesday. The question, is this the case to indict a former president for the first time in our history? Is this the best case? Is this the most legitimate, clear-cut case? Well, guess what? The country's now going to have the chance to test that question, not theoretically, but practically in a court of law. And as Robert Costa said, you can count on former President Trump to be combative, not only publicly, but legally, to try to delay this for as long as he can and project himself, which he's already begun to do, as some kind of martyr to the justice system in this country, someone who cannot possibly be treated fairly. Now, the court of law will decide whether or not this set of charges, whatever they may be, are or are not legitimate. But unlike impeachment, which is an entirely political enterprise, this will now be based on the law of New York and the facts of the case. And yes, most of this conduct predated President Trump's arrival in the Oval Office, but there is some suggestion in the evidence about the payments involved that some of those might have been authorized or carried out by the president while he was president. That would certainly give a larger atmospheric reality to both the underlying charges and the president's conduct. And that will have not only legal but political ramifications. But to all this conversation we've been having, Nora, about what this will look like, I want to, if I can, try to give the nation a couple of analogies. Those of us old enough to remember the Elian Gonzalez case or the O.J. White Bronco. Both of those were covered minute by minute, aerially. Every single step was videotaped and recorded for all history. Get ready for that, because that's what's going to happen when this day comes and former President Trump leaves Mar-a-Lago, flies to probably a nearby airport, possibly Teterboro, New Jersey, and is escorted by motorcade with the Secret Service in tow for this arraignment and a bond hearing. It will be a moment unforgettable in American history with tremendous political and legal ramifications. The country's been thinking about it, wondering what it might be, wondered if it would ever come for the better part of a week and a half. Now it's going to come.
Major Garrett, thank you. And just to recap what we are learning, for the first time in history, a former president of the United States will face criminal charges. He has been indicted on felony charges in a New York grand jury in relation to the hush money case involving former porn star Stormy Daniels. Robert Costa confirming this news for CBS and speaking with his attorneys. What happens now?
This is a historic legal and political moment, but it is only the beginning of a legal and political showdown.
Robert Costa, thank you. We should note we do not yet know the exact charges that the former president has been indicted on. Our coverage will continue on CBS News streaming on your local news, and we're going to have a full wrap-up shortly on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington.
All right, and you were looking outside of the New York office where the grand jury has just voted to indict former President Donald Trump. Now, we are going to keep this shot up for you and essentially follow along with you. We are not clear on whether Donald Trump is inside this building, but we are going to remain outside of here, just in case we're able to see into possibly his team or members of his team or himself come out. So we are going to continue to monitor this. I'm going to leave this stakeout camera up for you, but this is in New York right now. We just learned former President Donald Trump has been indicted by a New York grand jury. You can follow the latest on our Atlanta News First app. We're pushing out any major updates, including major moments of this live coverage for you. So make sure you have that app ready to go. And then, of course, we're following this on Atlanta News First during our evening newscast. We're going to keep this shot up right here. This is the District Attorney's of New York's office. Again, in New York, we're going to continue to monitor. This is a live camera shot. So there is a possibility that we might see the former president walk out of here, or people that have been involved in this indictment process, members of his team. But again, we have not been told that he's there. We are just, again, hanging out in this area, monitoring the situation along with you. All right, everybody, and we are right here with you looking outside of the district attorney of New York's the office building. Really, just moments ago we learned that former President Donald Trump has been indicted by a New York grand jury. Now, he's the first ex-president to be indicted. We are going to continue that coverage for you. I actually want to bring in attorney Josh Schiffer to join us and give just a little context to the situation. So bear with me here. We're live with you guys, and I am going to admit him over Zoom here, and we should get going. Now, Josh, if you can hear me, you might not be able to see me, but I'm hoping you can hear me. We're bringing you into this conversation about this recent news that we learned. Former President Donald Trump indicted by a New York grand jury. Tell us a little more.
It's absolutely what the world has been looming over here for going on a couple of weeks. Just to remind everybody, this is the New York case. Former President Trump has several investigations happening nationwide, including one based here out of Fulton County, Georgia. This is the New York case related to the alleged hush money, or I shouldn't say alleged, the $130,000 that was provided to Stormy Daniels in exchange for not going public with a story that then, of course, went public. This relates back to the Mr. Cohen, President Trump's former attorney, and the crimes that he admitted committing. And when he committed those crimes, admitted committing them, he served substantial prison time. Now, the former district attorney in New York, Cyrus Vance, led a substantial investigation during the end of Cyrus Vance's long tenure as a very legendary district attorney with a high national profile. Alvin Bragg replaced him, a replacement of a district attorney in a city like New York, a national leadership position. It's more than your local prosecutor. These are very political jobs. It's very complicated and high-end stuff. He declined to prosecute this case for quite a period of time, but then at some juncture decided the time and the evidence was right, having lost some of the people that worked on the case originally, and he decided to present the case to a grand jury. Now, we know that it needs to be a felony, and the felony that most people are discussing, and I believe that if there's an indictment, it's going to be that charge, is going to be a felony related to federal election violation or election laws, election financing laws in New York. That's the most logical way for them to take the otherwise acknowledged fact about misleading people, making false statements about this payment into a felony. It's the pathway that the district attorney ostensibly is using. And as I've been able to gather, an indictment has been returned. That means a grand jury has agreed and returned what's called a true bill of indictment. That indictment is the listed charges. It's been placed under seal. And then at some point it will be released and former President Trump will be processed, and we'll get to learn a lot more about what the future holds.
Yeah, certainly. And, you know, as we get this news, it doesn't really come as a surprise. The former president did make mention that he was anticipating being arrested. And obviously it didn't happen on the day that he said it would. But now we're learning as we get closer to the weekend, he has now been indicted in New York by a grand jury. I want to talk a little bit about legally what this means for him, and then get into some of really this extraordinary development, some of what it means for the future, for critics who said that he lied and cheated his way to the top, and supporters who say that he's being unfairly targeted, and all of this accumulating to his 2024 presidential bid. So let's talk a little bit about this indictment and what it means for him legally, and just what ground it sets as him being the first ex-president to be indicted.
It's one of the things that's going to make this an absolutely gripping story that is going to grab the entire world's attention. This is the first president to ever face criminal indictment. This is a criminal charge that carries substantial legal punishments, including incarceration, for over a year. Now, whether that's a legitimate possibility, who knows? This is a financial crime. He has no record. There's a lot of facts that, whether you love him or hate him, are positive when it comes to approaching the case from a criminal perspective. It's going to impact so many other things, though. This is the boulder getting dropped in a pond, and the waves are huge. So theoretically, yes, he's going to have to show up and be processed in a normal criminal defense posture. He's going to retain lawyers. They're going to file motions. He's going to get processed through a jail. Everybody's wondering about whether there's going to be a perp walk, or is he going to be released on charges? Is he going to submit to a photograph? Nowadays, it's very common for people to, of all shapes and sizes and ages and races and creeds, to have a booking photo. It's not the scourge or the stigma that it was before. And former President Trump is an absolute master of leaning into bad facts, turning them around, and using them to benefit and advocate for the positions he wants to put forward. It's one of the things that's driven his fan base to be so loyal to him, is he eats the bad facts, as we'd say as lawyers. So from a criminal perspective, I don't really expect this to be a case where they're threatening him with big prison time. It's much more the statement being made and the efforts that are going to be involved in prosecuting him. Without a doubt, his legal team is going to put forth an immense and complicated legal defense. He has great lawyers. I know people disagree with style and all that, but he has successfully employed lawyers for decades to avoid legal and civil, or criminal and civil, entanglements. I don't expect that to stop at all. The impact on the rest of the world, well, let's just start like you were talking about his race for president. He currently is one of the only two mainstream Republicans that have announced, him and Nikki Haley, that this arrest is going to impact how he acts in that race, how he is electable, according to not just his biggest fans, but the rest of the GOP and then the electorate at large. This may open up a door for Ron DeSantis, who we've all discussed is waiting for his opportunity to step up. He's basically said he's going to run for president, and facing a candidate like Donald Trump, who besides having his existing baggage now has an additional fairly substantial scar across him. That is a real problem for Donald Trump's electability, regardless of whether you like him or not, and will provide an opportunity for candidates to aggressively posture in the GOP primary race. There's also going to be overflow into things like the U.S. stock market. My stock universe has exploded with concerns about how this is going to affect an already delicate economy. We are on the balance of what some say is going to be a recession, or are we ready to start popping off and earning double-digit returns? We don't know right now. And how does this arrest affect the market? I don't know, except that it's gonna.
Yeah, forgive my ignorance, but I have seen online a lot of people saying this could be good for him. I mean, it is a criminal indictment. It is serious, and it puts him in very real hot water. But if he's able to legally make it out of this alive, that it could be in his favor for his future presidential run. Wanted to get your legal perspective on that, but also what does it mean to legally survive an indictment? And this is obviously, we haven't seen a former president indicted in this way before, but could it be a possibility for him, considering what he is being indicted for in this case?
Well, let's start off with that last point and the criminal exposure. It's a real criminal case. Jails are real, judges are real, prosecutors are real. They are not going to give him a slap and a tickle. They're going to go forward aggressively. They know that all of the state's agents and state actors are going to be scrutinized within an inch of their life. There cannot be any mistakes. That's because we already know what President Trump or former President Trump's defense is going to be. This is a political witch hunt, and that is a very meaningful defense that is going to attract a number of adherents right out of the gate. That's why former President Trump can lean into the facts, take this indictment, and turn it into a political positive. He is going to use this as the best evidence. Speak of a legal concept, the best evidence of a witch hunt is a prosecution. And he's going to turn around and tell everybody in America that just like he told them, there was going to be a witch hunt against him. They were going to dig up things that happened long ago in the past that other people had given up on, and they were going to make political and legal hay out of it. And he makes an excellent point with that argument. And to people that are open to that argument and that argument's meaningful for them, it's profoundly impacting. He predicted the future, and just like he said, the future happened. I expect him to fundraise and to coordinate extensively based on this. He's going to try to grow his political influence and nab some conservatives and I mean some independents and maybe even some people on the far left who are going to be, sympathetic to someone who is a target of the federal government. Ask any criminal defense attorney. Once the political prosecutions start, it's impossible to get away from. The overwhelming power of the state, be it the federal or state level, is so challenging to fight against when it's all weighing down on you and it feels like a betrayal of the American dream. He's going to grab that and run with it, and very few people have ever run with those kind of sentiments better than former President Trump.
You know, as we talk about this, I did just receive a statement from former President Donald Trump that I'm going to read here with you, and then we can talk a little bit about it. This from the 45th President of the United States, quote, "Never before in our nation's history has this been done. The Democrats have cheated countless times over the decades, including spying on my campaign, but weaponizing our justice system to punish a political opponent who just so happens to be a president of the United States and by far the leading Republican candidate for president has never happened before, ever." And he continues to say Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who was handpicked and funded by George Soros, is a disgrace. Rather than stopping the unprecedented crime wave over New York City, he's doing Joe Biden's dirty work, ignoring the murders and burglaries and assaults he should be focused on. This is how Bragg spends his time. I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. Everyone can see it. So our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg, and then we will defeat Joe Biden, and we are going to throw every last one of these crooked Democrats out of office so we can make America great again, end quote. That statement just into our newsroom from President Donald Trump. So you can kind of see, based on his reaction right now, the direction he's going to be taking this.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't be surprised if that tweet or truth or whatever you want to call it had actually been compiled quite some time ago, because they've known this is coming, and it's no question that he's going to lean into the narrative that he's been propounding for quite some time, that this is a witch hunt. I think it resonates very strongly with his electorate, or the people in his constituency that really appreciate it. So he's going to grab it full throttle. It was a highlight of all of his prior complaints, ranging from the more realistic to the downright offensive. There are people that would criticize the use of Mr. Soros's name, which is a boogeyman for the left in many ways. And we'll see how well that resonates. Former President Trump is not trying to win 100% of the electorate. He's trying to generate the interest in order to prevail at a primary in the face of unprecedented government intrusion into his political life. And that narrative is very powerful for citizens that feel that the government has gone too far, is too powerful, and has created a system that resists interruption. That's why people like President Trump and candidate Trump appeal to people in the protest universe, in the anarchy universe. It's not just the theoretical conservative American voter. It's a very wide group of people.
As we talk about this, another thing I wanted to bring up, this is obviously not the same grand jury as we saw in Georgia, and they have many differences, and it was just not the same investigation, not the same procedure. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the differences from what we saw here in Georgia to what we're seeing in New York, these two grand juries.
Well, they're investigating two different things. Grand jury generally means it's a private group of citizens that the district attorney or prosecuting office has gathered together in order to review charges brought with the level of probable cause, so that there is a continued investigation. And I will apologize for the Justice Kitty there. But the grand jury, they meet in private. They hear one side of the evidence. Now, in Donald Trump's New York case, that got a little bit different because he was allowed under a special rule to present some rebuttal evidence, and other accused, such as law enforcement, are allowed. But the grand jury is the one that basically listens to the prosecutor, says, yes, that's a valid charge, and then issues a true bill of indictment, which is the actual law and an allegation of how the law was broken by the accused. And that's what the jury is going to vote on. They sign the indictment. The defendant signs the indictment. It's a very formal deal. Now, the Georgia special grand jury was a grand jury in that it was a private group of citizens that was brought together upon motion by the elected prosecutor, but it wasn't the standard everyday grand jury that is presented with hundreds, if not thousands, of cases. It was a special grand jury, and each state has specific rules allowing the composition of a special grand jury for special purposes. And it's thoroughly documented in how the district attorney's office brings these about, what powers those grand juries have, and what the scope of their work is as it's managed by a judge, which in Georgia was managed by the Honorable Robert McBurney, a judge that I'm quite familiar with. Judge McBurney knew he was dealing with a big issue, and I think a lot of people have become familiar with his face because of the importance of the Fulton County Special Grand Jury. Now, what's happened is that grand jury was specifically empowered to use subpoena power and investigatory powers inherent in a grand jury to investigate allegations related to Donald Trump's actions in and around the election here in Georgia. Most specifically, this phone call that was made, recorded, and released that can be construed as a violation of Georgia law because the president was, according to some, interfering with the electoral process directly with the Secretary of State, Mr. Raffensperger. That will be up for a jury to determine, but they may have also brought several additional charges because they have a lot of discretion in what they charge, how they charge, and who they charge. So there may be a number of indictments that flow from that Georgia special grand jury. That grand jury issued a report. That report has been submitted. It is in the court's possession. And so the grand jury has been released from its obligations, except for the fact they're still not allowed to talk about certain portions of the deliberations, as well as whether there were some indictments and things like that. So we've seen some news coverage of one grand juror in particular who may or may not have spoken out of school. We haven't heard very much about it since then. And the judge most recently this week ordered Fani Willis, the Fulton County DA, to release the report on or before May 1st. And that was in response to the worldwide interest in the results of this report. When its contents were discussed briefly earlier, it was noted specifically that it needed to stay confidential because Miss Willis was making additional charging decisions with people that may not have thought they were going to be charged. And there was a fairness issue involved in the people that may end up getting charged. I also feel that both the DA in Fulton County and Alvin Bragg's office probably communicated to some degree about the various cases. There is everything from national security concerns on down weighing on these public officials. They do not want the political repercussions of doing something that's going to come back on them in a harmful or negative way as much as possible, even though I think everybody is expecting some sort of disturbance in the civility of our nation with this announcement, especially due to the fact that former President Trump made some really inappropriate sounding tweets earlier in this process.
You know, as we have this conversation surrounding just this news that has come down, both anticipated but still coming as a shock to so many, I want to kind of get a better understanding, legally, how people should be approaching this. They've heard that the former president has been indicted. This has never happened before. We're already seeing so many thoughts and reactions over on our Facebook and YouTube. But really, what's next here? As we're all going to watch this unfold, what should we be looking out for?
Well, before we get to what's next, let's talk about just a charge real quick. A charge or an indictment is just that. It's not a conviction. There's been almost no due process, and your presumption of innocence applies most strongly at the beginning, before investigations have become public, before there has been a transparent investigation where people get to check in on the work law enforcement has done. So he is absolutely innocent until proven guilty, just like any other accused member of society. Now, you can talk to those people and they'll tell you that it doesn't feel that way, and it feels like they've been convicted in the court of public opinion before they've even opened their mouth. But that's neither here nor there. When it comes to the actual process, and I'm not familiar necessarily with the New York State specific calendar rules, and they may have some specific calendar rules, but generally, once an indictment is returned, there's going to be a warrant for arrest. That is what begins the physical processing of the individual, and that warrant needs to be satisfied. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean in all cases you're going to go to jail for some period of time. You can be released on what's called a copy of charges. You can display your driver's license or other identification in lieu of posting a bond or bail. You can also have charges that have no bond assigned or have a bond figured out in advance so that processing is kept to minimal or nothing. That, I believe, is going to be a really interesting development to watch over the next week as we find out how Alvin Bragg's office wants to approach an accused individual. Will they provide, or what deference will they provide, given the station and the respect due a former president of the United States? Will they allow him to take care of this in a very private manner, which I pretty much guarantee they're going to offer him that option of handling this in a more private manner? Or is it going to be a public spectacle? And I believe that's what we're going to get, because I feel strongly former President Trump wants to use this public spectacle as a substantial part of the narrative he's based his campaign on.
And thank you so much. We're joined by Josh Schiffer here, giving us legal context into this breaking news that we just got into the newsroom a moment ago, really, of former President Donald Trump indicted by a New York grand jury. I want to make sure we didn't leave anything out of this conversation. Any final thoughts as you're watching this unfold with us?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Remember, he hasn't been convicted, and even if he is, that doesn't stop him from being an effective candidate. This is just an allegation. It will be very interesting to see how the various stakeholders respond, and it is a very complicated game of 4D chess, would be the joke. Now we're also going to wait for punch number 2. Now that New York has come out, we're going to listen and hear what former President Trump's response is. Is he going to lean into it? Probably. But then there's going to be the Fulton County release. And there are questions about how effective his responses will be, given that there are 2 likely sets of indictments coming his way, and how that's going to affect his defense of them, as well as how can he use them or mitigate them in consideration of his active political campaign. This is a unique moment in American history. We are watching something we will read about in the future. This is history as it happens, and it's fantastic to watch it from such a front view as being here in Fulton County.
Yeah, well said, and we will be watching and following this. Josh, thank you so much as always. It's great to have you on. Such an important discussion to have, and I'm glad we could have you be a part of it. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and I encourage everybody to watch and keep an open mind. This is the fundamental bones of our Constitution and our states, and as we apply them to the famous, that filters down to us regular folk too. So everybody needs to watch this.
Yeah, certainly. All right, we're going to shift gears here. I want to bring in our political reporter, Doug Reardon, into the conversation here. I'm going to pull him up in a moment so you should see him. There we go. So we have our Doug Reardon joining us here. And you've heard this news drop when I did, and we knew this was coming, but it still somehow comes out as a shock at the end of the day, the former president being the first to be criminally indicted in this way. You come from the world of politics. Just give me a reaction to this.
Yeah, I think no one is surprised it actually happened. I think the timing of it certainly is not surprising either. We know that the president had called on supporters to protest this last week when he thought it might be coming down. But yeah, here we are almost a week later now, and this is where we're at. But just a couple things that I want to talk about too. Obviously, I know you've been touching on it, but for anyone just joining us here, the nature of these charges, although we don't know exactly what they are yet, are over alleged hush money payments made to women who claim to have had extramarital affairs with the former president. These were made in 2016, and so the talk is that there could be some element of campaign finance violations, of tax code violations, something having to do with these hush money payments that were made. But again, I think the big name that everyone kind of remembers out of this when it first was brought to light was Stormy Daniels, the adult film star, who has been very vocal about some of what has gone on with this case. It's been years in the making, truly. This certainly didn't come out of nowhere. No one should be surprised by this. Even the president himself, again, like we just said, had made calls to supporters to kind of get angry about this. But it is, however, I hate to use this word given the last couple of years, but it is quite unprecedented, this criminal case against a president, former or sitting. That has never happened before. Something else, too. This does not bar President Donald Trump, former President Trump, from actually running for the White House. So you will probably expect that he will continue with his campaign. He is one of 3 official campaigns now that have opened here in this new election cycle for 2024 for the White House. And so don't expect any interruptions to that. Nothing about these charges bars him from actually running for president. So again, while we still don't know the specific charges, we can expect it to have something to do with those payments. And what's funny about this, too, is what it does to the field now, because we just came actually from a Ron DeSantis event. The Florida governor was here in Georgia, just kind of promoting some of his policies and talking about the similarities between Florida and Georgia. But keep in mind that Governor DeSantis has not launched an official campaign for the White House in 2024. And just speculatory here, but you would have to imagine he is quite happy about this, at least on the front of what this means for his, we expect, future campaign for the White House. I mean, again, will this deter people from voting for Donald Trump? Maybe, maybe not. But regardless, I think it's a chance that Governor DeSantis is willing to take. So when their legislative session ends in May, and he, as we expect him to, announces a campaign for the White House in 2024, there could be some voters looking for another option to Donald Trump, and DeSantis could be their guy. So it's just interesting timing that he was actually here in Georgia, and probably still is here in Georgia as this announcement is being made. So I thought that was interesting. Certainly, it's safe to say good news for him on that front. But just a couple other things too. As far as whether or not people will actually vote for Donald Trump or not vote for Donald Trump, will this deter them from doing that in 2024? Just remember that the president is always, certainly no stranger to controversy, to scandal. Just alone in his presidency, if you look back at some of what he's gone through, 2 impeachments, the Mueller report into his foreign ties with Russia. Again, we also now have here in Georgia our Fulton County grand jury that could bring down charges any day. And then the investigation into the January 6th riots and the Mar-a-Lago classified documents that were found at his home. And so the president is juggling all these controversies and legal issues. And still, again, a lot of people have not pulled their support for him. So really no telling what this could do for his prospects in 2024. But, also no comment from the White House yet. No comment from the Justice Department either. So they're staying relatively tight-lipped on this. I'm not surprised by that. But, again, given the gravity of this, it is interesting. No comment from them yet. And also important to note, too, that we talked about Alvin Bragg, the DA out of that circuit in New York. This wasn't his investigation. This has been going on long enough that it actually preceded him in that role. And so he got a lot of flack for taking this investigation on and continuing it and still continuing to pursue charges. So just important to note, because I think it kind of sets a good timetable for how long this has actually been going on.
And I wanted to read this quote here, statement directly from President Donald Trump, following this news here. He says, never before in our nation's history has this been done before. The Democrats have cheated countless of times over the decade, including spying on my campaign, but weaponizing our justice system to punish a political opponent who just so happens to be a president of the United States and by far the leading Republican candidate for president has never happened before, ever. And he goes on to say, quote, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who was handpicked and funded by George Soros, is a disgrace. Rather than stopping the unprecedented crime wave taking over New York City, he's doing Joe Biden's dirty work, ignoring the murders and burglaries and assaults he should be focused on. This is how Bragg spends his time. I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. Everyone can see it. And so our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg, and then we will defeat Joe Biden. And we are going to throw every one of these crooked Democrats out of office so we can make America great again. Ending, of course, with his slogan there. But that quote kind of paints a picture of how he's reacting to it. We talked to attorney Josh Schiffer, who said this is very well possible that this statement from the former president was drafted in advance. They knew this was coming. This didn't really catch them off guard. But that tells you a lot of how he is reacting to this, and he even lays out, what he's going to do. He's going to fight this, and then he's going to continue his push and his bid for president in 2024.
Right, and again, nothing's stopping him from doing that, which is the interesting thing about this. And the other thing I think too that is relevant to our viewers and to us here as journalists covering this in Georgia is made this embolden Fani Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney, to go ahead and press charges, because again, there were so many chips that were kind of lined up. Everyone was waiting for them to fall, and this is really the first domino in that. And so between some of the federal investigations that are going on, and this Fulton County grand jury potential indictment also hanging over his head, this could expedite that, certainly. Now that Fani Willis has seen a district attorney go through with pressing charges, we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. But again, it's a very different investigation. Obviously, the subject matter is very different. The scope of it is very different as far as the number of people that were involved in the Fulton County stuff with the election meddling. There's far more names to be considered in that. So very different. But again, it's the principle of the thing. Could this actually embolden Fani Willis to go ahead and potentially press some charges? We will see. Obviously, we have no insight as to when that could happen. But, again, as we talk about what the nature of these charges are, the hush money payments to women, namely Stormy Daniels, that adult film star actress, she did not testify before the grand jury, but very well could in this trial. And so we haven't heard her side of the story in a courtroom yet or in any court filings coming out of that grand jury investigation, but she very well could testify in this trial, which, again, I think would be kind of a culmination of what's happened over the last couple of years, where she has very publicly told her story. And, of course, former President Trump is very vehemently denied some of these things that have gone on. But then you also have Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer. People refer to him as the president's enforcer. He was the one who this hush money payment, this alleged $130,000 that went to Stormy Daniels, filtered through, and of course he faced some trouble and was found guilty of several charges on that front too, which I also think is interesting. We can't overlook that somebody has already been found guilty in this case, just of course on a much lower scale than what Donald Trump would be looking at. But the ball is certainly rolling on this now, and we don't really have a good indication of what the timetable could be. I mean, for goodness sake, we don't even know what the charges are yet. But we do have some background into how this could go, given that Michael Cohen faced charges, went through the trial, and was found guilty on some things.
We talk about the indictment and how criminal and how very real this is for him, but we also have to think back about his impeachment. If we're just talking about how this impacts him politically in his hopes for 2024, he survived an impeachment. I believe, and you'll have to double check me on the statistics, but that his supporters and his percentage was still holding steady after that. But then if we talk about political impact on a presidential hopeful, or once again presidential hopeful running for another term, an indictment like this could be more serious, or is it survivable, just like that impeachment that we saw him?
No, great point, and fair question to ask, right? Because it didn't. I mean, but 2 impeachments, right? This is not the first time that President Donald Trump has made legal history, so to speak, in terms of what he has done, and so he was also obviously the first president to be impeached twice, and it really didn't put a whole lot of a dent in his approval rating and in his favorability with Republicans, and so will something outside of the federal government, where we're talking about, a state jurisdiction, will that impact people? It's too early to tell. But again, with all the scandal that the president has been through, all the controversy and all the investigations that this president has been through, he still has strong support. I was out at, again, that Ron DeSantis event earlier today, and there were tons and tons of Trump supporters, very vocal ones at that, and that is, of course, the MO of his base, is to be loud and vocal about their support for him. But, I think another thing that the president is facing an investigation over is January 6th, and if anything, that seems to have been what turned voters off to voting for him again. It certainly was a hot-button issue at the time because of when it happened, right after the election. So, will that carry over? Will people have forgotten about that and vote for him anyways, despite voicing some opposition to some of his actions on that day? It's really hard to tell, but I know that other candidates who have come out with their campaigns, who are running, Nikki Haley, and again, Ron DeSantis is a very presumable challenger to Donald Trump in 2024. They have to be pleased at least with what this could potentially do for their campaigns, strictly because of the heat that this brings on Donald Trump and his presidency. I mean, even if you can get over the sentiment of him facing an indictment, he's going to be tied up in this for a long time. This isn't a small matter. This is going to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources fighting this from his camp. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly it could impact quite severely his campaign, but not his ability to actually run. And based on that statement that you just read and that I've seen, I have no doubt that he's going to continue to move full steam ahead with his campaign for the White House in 2024.
And, as we talk about this, I just wanted to mention we did just see a tweet from Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm going to pull that up here, off of Twitter, saying, "I stand with Trump." And his full statement that I can read again, but his full statement laid out below. So a lot of reaction coming through. I mean, Trump indictment trending on Twitter, as you can see in your bottom right. But a Georgia representative, to localize this, Marjorie Taylor Greene has in the past talked about her support for the former president, and this just the latest from her. And I'm going to read that statement again, now that we have in front of you, just so you can follow along with us. I'm going to bring down my graphic. Former President Donald Trump saying, quote, "This is a political persecution and election interference at the highest level in history. From the time I came down the golden escalator at Trump Tower and even before I was sworn in as your president of the United States, the radical left Democrats, the enemy of the hardworking men and women of this country, have been engaged in a witch hunt to destroy the Make America Great Again movement. You remember, just like I do, Russia, 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 the Mueller hoax, Ukraine, impeachment, hoax, the illegal and Constitution Mar-a-Lago raid, and now this. The Democrats have lied, cheated, and stolen in their obsession with trying to get Trump, but now they've done the unthinkable, indicting a completely innocent person in an act of blatant election interference. Now, never before in our nation's history has this been done before. The Democrats have cheated countless times over the decades, including spying on my campaign, but weaponizing our justice system to punish a political opponent who just so happens to be a president of the United States and by far the leading Republican candidate for president, has never happened before, ever. Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who was handpicked and funded by George Soros, is a disgrace. Rather than stopping the unprecedented crime wave taking over New York City, he's doing Joe Biden's dirty work, ignoring the murders and burglaries and assaults he should be focused on. This is how Bragg spends his time. I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. Everyone can see it. So our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg, and then we will defeat Joe Biden. And we are going to throw every last one of these crooked Democrats out of office so we can make America great again. Now, that quote coming directly from former President Donald Trump in reaction to his indictment and now by the New York grand jury, and now we've just learned some reaction coming out from other political officials, obviously people who have learned the news. This has become a topic on social media now that is trending, but Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out saying, "I stand with Donald Trump," linking that statement below. Now, that brings me to this question here, and Doug, this is something you've been following pretty closely. We know that these were separate cases. The Georgia grand jury and New York grand jury, I feel not too much alike, but let's talk about their differences, because what we saw unfold with the Georgia grand jury is quite different from what we're seeing now unfolding in New York.
Yeah, certainly. The timelines are different. This New York case is 5 years in the making. We're getting close to that with the full grand jury investigation as well. But yeah, they're entirely different. One word of caution to everybody, too, that I think is important to note is that at this point, pretty much everything is speculatory. So we can guess at what the charges are. Are they going to be bookkeeping charges? Is it going to be something with campaign finance? It's all going to kind of impact the nature of how this plays out as far as what the prosecutor actually, sees in this case to be confident enough to pursue these charges. And also important to note is that prosecutors don't actually charge. That is the job of the grand jury. It is their goal to determine if there is enough evidence for this to be brought to a trial, and then the prosecutor is the one who decides to take it up. We can have recommendations from grand juries. We can have actual charges that a grand jury recommends that a jurisdiction go after, but prosecutors don't charge, and I think that's something that's a little bit misleading in the former president's statement talking about Alvin Bragg doing this, Alvin Bragg doing that. Bragg was not the one to do any investigating here. He was simply handed an investigation that was carried out by a grand jury. And truthfully, that is one similarity, of course, that we find between this New York case and this Fulton County case is that the prosecutors really have no hand in charging these cases. I'm getting off on a tangent now, but we had a bill pass in Georgia during this 40-day session where it would be easier for a panel or for voters to recall or remove prosecutors. A lot of people speculated that it had to do with this Fulton County investigation into the former president and his alleged election meddling, but again, I think if that's anyone's thought on the matter, that would also be a little misguided because, again, prosecutors do not charge. They are simply able to take in the recommendations and the findings of grand juries and work from there if it makes its way into the courtroom. So, as far as the differences, there are many. I think a big handful of them, again, have to do with the charges themselves, even though we don't know what is actually going to come down against Donald Trump in New York specifically. We do know that it very much likely has to do, again, with these hush money payments made to women, namely Stormy Daniels, the adult film actress, back, in 2016. That was a very turbulent time for the Trump campaign. The polls were tight. Things were not looking good for them. And here we have Stormy Daniels starting to come out with some really damaging information. And by the way, this is not speculatory. This is all from the trial of Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer. But here we have this woman threatening to come out with this damaging information. And these alleged hush money payments were made. Michael Cohen has said he was the one that made them. And so, I think the nature of the suspected charges, if they have to do with that, are very different than what we see in Fulton County, where, 4 years later, we're dealing with something entirely different where as it relates to alleged election meddling. I think, as we mentioned, again, the scope of it is very different as well, given that when we talk about, and we're assuming now, right, that these are the charges, but where you have Trump, Cohen, and Stormy Daniels all involved in this. I mean, with the election meddling Fulton County DA case here, the scope of it is so much wider. You have a full slate of almost 24 fake electors whose names were brought up to this grand jury, who were kind of targets of this investigation. There are so many more moving parts in that one, I think, than there was in this New York DA case. That things are just, it's just a different scale altogether. And of course, I mean, depending on what happens with this Fulton County grand jury report as well, we could see the timetable change. It took 5 years for Alvin Bragg, and even this predated him, but it took 5 years for this district in New York to get these charges, even though we don't know what they are, to get these charges handed down. The Fulton County case, like I said, could kind of really ramp up now. Bonnie Willis has everything she needs, all the information she needs, all the reports she needs to issue charges. I can't speak to what her thought process is, but we know that this could certainly embolden her to do something here in this case, now that she would not be the first one to enter that arena. And so yeah, I think one affects the other. I think obviously they're different in their nature, and very much so different in the charges that we could expect out of the Fulton County and that we expect out of the New York case too. So yeah, very different. But again, I mean, they could have the same effect on the president's campaign if people decide they don't like what they see and decide not to vote for him.
And, you know, one thing I wanted to talk about, some more of the reaction that we're seeing coming in. I'm going to pull Twitter back up. This one, pretty prominent, from Adam Schiff, who served as the senior member of the House Committee on the Judiciary, and he actually rose to national prominence as the lead prosecutor in President Donald Trump's first impeachment trial. Now I'm going to read some reaction that's coming down from him, saying the indictment of a former president is unprecedented, but so too is the unlawful conduct in which Trump has been engaged. A nation of laws must hold the rich and powerful accountable when they hold a high office, especially when they do. To do otherwise is not democracy. And then we go from that, and I want to react to that in a moment with you here, Doug, to Kevin McCarthy, who is saying...
Just reading that now, yeah.
I'm going to read this quote from Kevin McCarthy. We'll talk about Adam Schiff here in a moment, but saying, quote, Alvin Bragg has irreparably damaged our country in an attempt to interfere in our presidential election as he routinely frees violent criminals to terrorize the public. He weaponized our sacred system of justice against President Donald Trump. The American people will not, it's cut off, so let me expand on that if you bear with me for a moment. The American people will not tolerate this injustice, and the House of Representatives will hold Alvin Bragg and his unprecedented abuse of power to account. So a lot to react to there. Let's start with Kevin McCarthy, since that's the quote I just read. Again, these are coming in, and as they're coming in, we'll read them all to you, but let's start there.
Yeah.
That's some actionable words from Kevin McCarthy, saying the House of Representatives, at least in his book, will try to hold Alvin Bragg accountable.
Yeah, all right, a couple things. One, I think the speaker is a little misguided on his understanding of how this works. Alvin Bragg did not issue the charges. This was a special grand jury made up of 23 citizens chosen at random to come and sit for months at a time to listen to this evidence and decide what should be done about this. Alvin Bragg was not in the room when these decisions were being made. So this focus on Bragg, I think, is a bit of a straw man issue that we have going on here. I understand why they're frustrated. Certainly, this was the nominee that they put so much stock into. And of course, Kevin McCarthy has a very tight relationship with Donald Trump. We know that much. But yeah, I mean, Alvin Bragg didn't issue the charges. These were 23 individuals in this jurisdiction in New York that brought this case to him and said, this is what we think you should do. And that was that. So, you know, fair enough. But I think the other thing, too, is on the other side of the coin, we also know that, you know, DAs, prosecutors certainly are not just islands on their own. I mean, going back to what we talked about a minute ago, with this prosecutorial oversight bill in Georgia, I mean, it passed. It passed pretty handily, too, in our General Assembly during this 40-day session where, you know, we have mechanisms for voters to remove prosecutors on a simple recall. It used to be 30%, now it's 2%. That's all it would take for a recall effort to remove a prosecutor. There's also a method in Georgia's bill that would allow for a panel to be set up for prosecutorial oversight as well, for them to be removed via that panel. So you have now two mechanisms for prosecutors to be removed if they are not prosecuting cases or prosecuting cases that are controversial and could see them lose their job at their post. And so, definitely I think that the speaker is onto one thing, in the sense of prosecutors certainly are not, behind this set of bars where they can't be reached. There are things that can be done. I'm not super keenly aware of what can be done at the federal level, but we saw it play out here in Georgia, where there certainly are things that can be done to hold prosecutors accountable and make it easier to remove them in cases like this, where people don't always necessarily agree with their decisions.
And as we continue to follow some of the reaction that's pouring in, and we wrap up our conversation here with you, Doug, I don't want to neglect Adam Schiff here, because this is pretty powerful words coming from him as having been such a center person in the impeachment, and so that I'm going to read that quote again from Adam Schiff, saying the indictment of a former president is unprecedented, but so too is the unlawful conduct in which Trump has been engaged, and a nation of laws must hold the rich and powerful accountable, even when they hold high office, especially when they do. So to do otherwise is not democracy. That's very different from what we saw from Kevin McCarthy, from what we saw from Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who said they support Donald Trump and will do what they can to support him. This is really, from his words, addressing the indictment and his take on all of this.
Yeah, hey, welcome to politics, right?
Yep.
You're gonna dig in where you think it needs to be done, but I think I would just caution everyone to just be wary of the spouting off on both sides until we even, first of all, know what the charges are. We still don't know that. I think that's important to note. We have a good idea, but we don't know for sure yet. And again, the one thing I want to throw in here is, whether or not this deters people from voting for Donald Trump, it does not deter him from running for office. He is still very much has an active campaign running, and you can expect him, based on what we know about him, to go full steam ahead. He is also someone that really loves to use this fuel and use this controversy as some kindling on the fire, and that sometimes, as it not does for everyone, but for him, it certainly seems to fire up his base and work quite a bit. I mean, you saw even in his own statement, he listed off a few controversies that he's been embroiled with over the last couple of years. He hasn't lost much support too. So we will see what happens. I think that's the thing I'm keeping my eye on. I'm most interested in is how will this impact voters' perceptions of Donald Trump. Got to wait and see.
Yeah, certainly. Hey, Doug, our Atlanta News First political reporter, always great to have you in a conversation like this. I want to talk a little bit about, this is not the end of our coverage. We're actually continuing on and following this as it breaks and as we're getting more reaction minute by minute. And here in a moment, we'll be joined by our great Washington, D.C. bureau to just talk more about what really this means for Donald Trump, what this means legally as a precedent, and politically. So we'll be getting a lot into that, but I want to make sure we didn't leave anything out here while I have you. Any final thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I would, like I said, I would just caution everyone to reserve any judgment, any thoughts until we know what the charges are. Like I said, we have a pretty good idea, but we're in uncharted waters here. We don't know what the charges are. We'll just have to wait and see before we can make any further analysis on how this could impact his run or his status in fighting the case legally.
Yeah, couldn't have said that better myself. Hey, taking you back out to this stakeout cam that we've been monitoring. I'm going to pull that up here with you so you can take a look. But that has been up since we first learned about this news, and there it is. That is a live camera outside of the district attorney's office, or the building, again in New York, where the grand jury just voted to indict former President Donald Trump. We'll be back here in a few minutes with our great Washington, D.C. bureau, just to talk a little bit more about what this means and what's next.
CBS News has learned former President Donald Trump is not expected to be indicted by a Manhattan grand jury today, though it could come by the end of the week. Still, after his calls for protests to, quote, take back our nation, steel barricades brought in by NYPD now surround the Manhattan courthouse and district attorney's office. New fencing has also been installed around the U.S.
All right, thanks so much to our viewers for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. Joy Lim Nakrin here, joined by John Decker, our White House correspondent for Atlanta News First Plus. John, we're so honored that you could join us today, because I know you're not only an attorney and a journalist, but also a member of the Supreme Court Bar. What can you tell us about what you've learned from our nation's capital tonight?
With all the speculation, what we don't know what this indictment is. It's a sealed indictment at this point. It may be unsealed as early as tomorrow or maybe Monday. And we know that it is likely next week that former President Trump will appear before a judge in Manhattan to enter an appearance for his arraignment, to enter a plea, guilty, not guilty. Likely he will enter a plea of not guilty. He will be processed at that time, fingerprinted, mugshot. He will not be handcuffed at any point during the course of this process, and he will be released in his own recognizance upon entering that appearance for his arraignment. But we don't know what this indictment specifically is. We don't know if it is one charge, many charges. We know what this grand jury has been investigating, and that is hush money payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. And the problem there, as far as a possible criminality associated with that, is those payments could have been coming from the former president's campaign account and covered up. It could have been coming from the Trump organization and covered up. It's often said it's not the crime, it's the cover up, and that could be the case with this particular matter.
Right, and it looks like, we're talking about the possibility of a charge of falsifying business records, which carries a maximum sentence of up to 4 years in prison. So, I mean, some serious potential charges on the table here. You were talking a little bit about the process of the indictment, which we anticipate to happen next week, per Trump's attorney. But I want to ask you a little bit about how that would look like, because obviously, we're talking about the former president, a very high-profile individual. Do you know anything about how that might happen?
Well, this is unprecedented, and there will be conversations that will happen involving security in Manhattan, involving the New York City police, the people that keep the peace around that court building in Manhattan, also the Secret Service, which protects the president. I would imagine next week, although the former president imagines himself being paraded in handcuffs before the press, heading up the stairwell to the courtroom, that won't happen. I think that the Secret Service will tell the former president and his team, we can't let that happen. You are going to be driven in an SUV in the underground garage of this courthouse. And I think that is what is more likely to happen than so-called appearance before a frenzy of media when that arraignment takes place.
Yeah, I've heard some talk about some of these conversations happening, like you mentioned, the Secret Service, but also with U.S. Marshals as well and the New York Police Department. Just kind of because you're an attorney and like I say, a member of the Supreme Court bar as well. How do those relationships work? Even though on the face it's adversarial when there's an indictment, how would these individuals actually work with Trump's inside team to make everything go smoothly?
The idea here is the safety, the protection of the former president. This is unprecedented, and that's the reason why these conversations will take place with all those entities that you just mentioned. They understand what's at stake here. They understand that it's important that there is security around the perimeter of the courthouse. There's security for the former president, and also the courthouse itself is protected. So all of those things have to be taken into account. That's one reason why it is extremely unlikely you're going to see an appearance of the former president, let's say, tomorrow morning, Friday morning in Manhattan. It will take time to put a procedure in place to make certain that the courthouse is protected and the former president is protected as well.
And John, you know, we know that the president is not a man, former president is not a man who backs down, and he's already indicated that he intends to fight this every step of the way, launching a vigorous defense. One would imagine that if there is a successful prosecution, he's going to fight that on appeal, you know, if he is convicted. But that said, do you think that's why officials here are taking every precaution to make sure that that they avoid the appearance of impropriety or bias in any way, that they don't shame him in public?
Oh, that's very important. I think that the former president would actually very much like that. He is already fundraising off of this indictment, sending out emails, a blast email to his supporters, individuals who have previously donated to his presidential campaign. Keep in mind, this is unprecedented. It's a former president. It's the front runner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, and he has now been indicted. And none of that has ever happened before. A lot of things that we'll see take place in the weeks and months to come never happened before. But again, I think having covered Donald Trump for 4 years while he was in the White House, having interviewed him way back in 1999 for the very first time, this is a person who revels in publicity. I don't think he shies away from it in any way. I think a good question that we don't know the answer to, it's so early in this judicial process, is whether or not Donald Trump, when this case is presented to a jury, once it's chosen, whether he actually testifies in this case. You know, he could certainly invoke his Fifth Amendment constitutional right, or he could take the stand himself and testify against the witnesses that have clearly testified against him before this grand jury, including Michael Cohen, his former personal attorney. So a lot that still needs to be seen in the weeks and months ahead as this case develops.
Yeah, it will be really fascinating to follow, and really interesting to see if he actually does testify, because he is not a shy man. But thank you so much to John Decker, White House correspondent, an attorney, member of the Supreme Court bar. We so appreciate your expertise and your journalism.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, I just want to show this live look here. We're kind of just watching the scene here after a New York grand jury has indicted the former president, Donald Trump. You know, it's something that we're digging into. I want to let you know that we have yet another attorney standing by to join us with some analysis, because there are so many questions about what exactly this means. You know, this indictment was filed under seal, so it's mysterious. What is actually in there? What are the official charges here? That's the big question. We do know that there is an announcement expected in the days to come. And so obviously the hope here is that that might be when we can learn about the official charges that are contained in this indictment. But we do know that the Manhattan District Attorney had been focusing on a felony charge of falsifying business records for much of this. It's a charge that carries a maximum prison sentence of 4 years. And this comes in a case that's really centered on so-called hush money payments. A $130,000 payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels during the final days of the 2016 presidential campaign. That's something that we've been reporting to you here at Atlanta News First, Atlanta News First Plus, and you may have also heard reports about in other media as well. But that is now culminating in this indictment. Again, big question is what is in it? What are the charges? What's the prison time that could be coming with that, right? And then what's the next step? Well, the next step is that the former president is going to be arraigned. And what we understand is that that could actually happen next week. That is according to his own attorney. I want to play for you just this story that we prepared that has a little bit of context for you on the investigation.
A handful of demonstrators gathered outside the Manhattan District Attorney's office Tuesday, calling for an indictment against former President Donald Trump. DA Alvin Bragg is leading the investigation into allegations that Trump may have falsified records to hide campaign finance violations in connection with a 2016 payment his former fixer Michael Cohen made to adult film star Stormy Daniels.
It makes no sense. It's desperate, and their key witness is Michael Cohen, and I think that says everything that you need to know.
Outside Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, protesters rallied in support of the former president and current 2024 presidential candidate. Trump has denied any wrongdoing. Republican allies call the investigation politically motivated.
This was 7 years ago, statute of limitation, and I think in your heart of hearts you know, too, that you think this is just political. And I think that's what the rest of the country thinks, and we're kind of tired of that.
Security has been beefed up around the Capitol after President Trump called on his supporters to protest. He made similar comments ahead of the January 6th riot. Barricades have also been put in place outside the courthouse in Manhattan.
Every NYPD officer, including plainclothes detectives, were ordered to wear their full NYPD uniforms today. A police source tells CBS News officers were also told to be ready to mobilize.
If indicted, Trump would become the first president in U.S. history to be charged with a crime.
All right, so, clearly that's stunning. I mean, we're talking about potentially the first former president to be charged with a crime. And the big question is, what is that crime? What is in this indictment here? Sorry, we're just standing by. We're trying to get Attorney Erica Wilson on the line here. We're just having a little bit of technical issues. But, I mean, just to recap, if you're just joining us, former President Donald Trump has now been indicted in New York on charges involving payments made during the 2016 presidential campaign to silence claims of an extramarital affair or sexual encounter with adult film star Stormy Daniels. This is the first ever criminal case against a former U.S. president. And, again, the big question is what are the crimes? What are the official charges here? We do know the Manhattan District Attorney had been focusing on a felony charge of falsifying business records associated with these so-called hush money payments. That felony charge of falsifying business records does carry a maximum sentence of 4 years, up to 4 years in prison. So something that is very serious. And I mean, the center of this probe has been that hush money, $130,000 in hush money. And this investigation is, there have been investigations for years now into his business, political, personal dealings as well. And what we anticipate next is that, first of all, I should say that the indictment was filed under seal. That's why there is this mystery about what exactly is in it. But we do expect an announcement in the days to come. Today's Thursday, so that might put us at early next week. So we think in business days. And when that happens, we're hoping that we can learn about some official charges. But the arraignment, again, scheduled to happen next week. That's according to the attorney for the former president. So that means with an arraignment, we're dealing with a very high-profile individual. So how is that going to look? From what we've been able to learn, there have been some talks between the Secret Service, U.S. Marshals, New York Police Department about how exactly the former president would be brought in to appear. Sorry, just a little bit of technical difficulty that we're trying to work through at the moment. I want to bring in Erica Wilson, who is an Atlanta-based attorney. Erica is on the line with us. Erica, thanks so much for being with us on short notice. What's your reaction?
This is unprecedented and historic. And so we are all, the country is sitting and we're waiting to see kind of how this unfolds. This is certainly something that is going to have not only a lasting impact on the criminal justice system, but as far as the political paradigm, as far as elections go in the future. So this is certainly something that we will all be waiting to see how this unfolds next week.
Erica, in terms of how this arraignment is going to go, I mean, what's even possible? What could it look like?
So, typically if this were a normal set of facts, but we do know here that we are not dealing with a normal set of facts. What we're dealing with is the former president, a very high profile individual, which he was even before the presidency. And then we're also looking at a potential presidential candidate for the next presidential election. And so certainly there will have to be some things that are done differently as far as logistics, but ordinarily what would happen is he will be booked. He should be booked. He will have a mugshot. Now, the next steps will be tricky because we don't know how they will handle logistically if he will be placed in jail. Certainly, how does that work when you have a former president who has Secret Service? Do you put him in jail? Do you put him in general population? What happens with that? I don't anticipate that he will be placed in jail. Right now, his attorneys are negotiating a surrender, and I am pretty sure part of that negotiation will be that he will not have to be put in jail. And then after that, he will have an arraignment, at which point he will be given, the formal reading of the indictment, and if there's any bond or any restrictions on his release, and I'm saying release, I'm using that word loosely, until he gets to trial. All of those things will be discussed at that time.
It's very interesting, Erica, because some, political analysts have said that kind of being a martyr is a good look for the former president in his own view, that, he might actually like if he gets a mugshot and if he's locked in jail. So I'm wondering how those negotiations are actually going. I wonder if his team is going to put up a fight. Maybe they want him to spend a night in jail or something. I don't know. What do you think?
At the end of the day, one thing that we do know about Trump is that he is very conscious of how his supporters perceive him. He's also very conscious of his legacy. Now, while he will turn this prosecution into persecution to benefit his presidential election, I don't think anybody, especially anybody as high caliber as him, especially a former president and a current presidential candidate, wants to actually do any jail time. I don't think that we're going to see him actually spending any time in jail, at least on the front end, because these things can be negotiated with the attorneys. They can work out a deal. There have been concessions made in the past for people of certain calibers, and certainly, again, we're dealing with the former president, so there will have to be some things that are adjusted logistically that you will not see with, a regular Joe Schmo type of person who will be booked in on these same charges.
The president put out a statement a short time ago, and in part, it's a long statement, but in part he said, I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. Everyone can see it. So our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg, and then we'll defeat Joe Biden, and we're going to throw every last one of these crooked Democrats out of office so we can make America great again. So, that's why I'm asking you these questions. Is it a good thing for this messaging, to get a mugshot?
It's not a good thing for the messaging, because what we always want to be cognizant of is there are so many different layers behind this that we will, as a country, have to be aware of. And I think there's going to be a massive threat to national security. There'll be a threat to local security, as Trump has the ability to kind of almost do like a dog whistle to his supporters. And so we will anticipate that there will be protests, there will be rallies in support of him. It's just a matter of how far does he push his supporters based on his perception that he is being persecuted rather than being prosecuted.
I see. So in other words, it's really a matter of keeping the peace. That authorities are going to make sure that this arraignment happens. That it's not adversarial. That things go amicably and smoothly, so that that it doesn't result in protests and unrest.
Absolutely, and they have to be cognizant of these things. While he is not above the law, we still have to keep some of the safety of the public and our country at the forefront of all of this. And so, unfortunately, there will be some concessions that will be made for him, and undoubtedly, this will be a spectacle. You can anticipate a spectacle across political lines, just across the country. This will be a spectacle because, again, this is historic. We have never seen this before, and so everybody is going to be watching to see. But it's definitely going to be a spectacle for the country to kind of see how all of this unfolds. And so the officials in New York are going to have to be very careful. They're going to have to plan. And I'm sure a part of the negotiations for the surrender will be based on the date, in order to give them time in order to prepare the courthouse to make sure that there are no threats there. Again, Trump is still a free man at this point, and he still has, as a former president, he still has security. And so all of these things are going to have to be considered before he can enter the courthouse. We're not dealing with a regular person. We're not dealing with a regular set of facts. So adjustments will have to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing to keep in mind is what happens down the line in the kind of criminal justice process, because first there's the arraignment, right, and then the whole goal here is that there is a trial, a successful prosecution that results in a conviction. That's the whole goal of prosecutors, but we know that Trump has indicated he plans to fight this every step of the way and would launch a vigorous defense. And if there is a successful prosecution, one would expect that his team would then launch an appeal. You and I, Erica, we talk about, we analyze legal cases, other cases, and that's something that you and I have talked about even in the context of the potential indictments coming out of Fulton County, Georgia. And for this case, but do you think that because ultimately we're talking about an individual who would likely appeal, that it's even more incumbent on prosecutors, if they want to be successful, that they've got to do everything, on the up and up. So when they're coming up with these charges, when they're actually arraigning the former president, they have to be very careful to maintain the appearance of propriety and fairness, and avoid looking biased in any way, avoid looking like they're trying to humiliate the former president.
Absolutely, but what we're forgetting here is we're skipping a step, because there's going to be a fight. You said it best. It will be a fight every step of the way. But I can guarantee you the next step will be Trump's lawyers will file a motion to dismiss the indictment, because this is the district attorney in New York was very strategic in how he did this. And so in New York, interference or fraudulent misrepresentation of documents is a misdemeanor. However, if it is done in furtherance of another crime, then it escalates to a felony. So while we have not seen the indictment, and we do expect that a judge could unseal the indictment as early as tonight, so hopefully by tomorrow we will know with specificity what he's been charged with. But what we do know is that what he was originally charged with was a misdemeanor that they are hoping to escalate to a felony. And so we have to determine what is the predicate crime. And so these are the things that Trump's attorneys are going to have dismissed. Essentially what you have here is Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, who's been indicted and he served time. He paid off Stormy Daniels. Trump paid him back. He characterized it on the books as legal fees. And so that is where there's going to be an unprecedented fight, is that a violation of the law? It is not against the law in New York to pay hush money. So it was perfectly valid for him to do that. The question is, when he put it on the books and he intentionally misrepresented it in furtherance of what we can only presume, Bragg will say, in furtherance of election interference, which will escalate that misdemeanor to a felony. If Trump's lawyers are successful in getting the predicate crime thrown out, then there is no subsequent crime of the felony. And so the first order of business is to get the motion to dismiss filed, to get this matter before a judge, to even see if there is any legal merit to what Bragg is trying to do. Because again, he was very strategic. We've never seen this done before. And so there is a lot of wiggle room in the law. There's not a lot of case precedent on this. And so this will be solely based on how good the lawyers are able to defend and support their legal position.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, so it looks like you said. I mean, if paying out hush money itself is not a crime, in New York, there's kind of been this struggle as to how to actually go forward with the prosecution, and we know that the felony charge of falsifying business records has been of the one focus, at least one focus. I mean, I know that's really the big question: is what are the charges going to be? What do you
Right,
think?
and again, how do we define falsifying business records? Because he paid his lawyer money and he characterized it as legal fees, and so that is the nuance that this case is going to hinge upon: is was it truly falsifying business records to pay your attorney, albeit paying him back for based on a loan to pay off, someone for your indiscretions in furtherance of trying to not have this information come out, for the election. So this is going to be a very nuanced legal argument that's going to have to be defended in a way such that the judge is going to see that either or there was some sort of fraudulent misrepresentation in these documents, or either there wasn't. And if there wasn't, then there is no felony, then therefore there is no indictment. And this all goes away. And so if Trump's lawyers are smart, which we know they are, and they will be very, aggressive in defending this, they're probably going to have a motion to dismiss by, in the next couple of weeks. You can anticipate that they will have something filed to get them in front of a judge to make these legal arguments to see if it can even sustain, a minimal level of judicial scrutiny.
And I mean, and here's the thing is that, it sounds like a lot of it is going to hinge on Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, what his own testimony about maybe arranging that $130,000 wire transfer. And from what I understand, he actually met repeatedly with prosecutors, testified before the grand jury, over the course of 2 days. Earlier this month, we're in March still, so it's earlier this month. And so, when you have that sort of testimony of a former attorney, does that carry a lot of weight? Is that going to be enough for prosecutors to kind of hang their hat on and at least keep this case moving forward, avoid the dismissal?
Well, undoubtedly, he is going to be the star of the show. This is less about Stormy Daniels, although, the media and Trump may try to make it about her. This is less about her. This is solely about election interference, and Cohen will be the star witness. Now, as far as the credibility will be concerned, he's a lawyer, but he's also, he's been indicted and he's done time. And so that may impact his credibility. But at the end of the day, he's going to be the star witness because he is the one who, facilitated the hush money. He was paid back by Trump, and he's the one who, he allowed Trump to put it in the books as legal fees. And he was solely responsible for advising Trump at the time. So, his credibility may be somewhat diminished, but at the end of the day, all that they have is him because he is the star of the show. And so clearly, whatever he presented to the grand jury in these special proceedings was enough for them to be able to advance forward with the indictment.
Yeah, and just for context, it's important to note actually that Michael Cohen actually served federal prison time. He entered a plea of guilty in 2018 to tax evasion and campaign finance violations in connection with these payments to Stormy Daniels. And maybe you can shed some light on this, just kind of knowing how these negotiations go between. He was a convict. I mean, he's not just a defendant. He became convicted of that crime. And prosecutors, was that kind of part of the deal here? That, we're not going to seek the maximum punishment against you, Michael Cohen, but you got to help us get the big fish that we're after as prosecutors, which is the former president.
Absolutely, because again, the big game is Trump. And so what typically happens, whether you're dealing with the Trump or anyone, you always go after the big fish. And in this situation, Trump is the big fish. And so while, Cohen did do some time, essentially what he got was a slap on the wrist. So I can guarantee you that at some point during his discussions with prosecutors was the information that he had in order for them to be able to even seek this indictment. And again, you have to remember, even with Bragg's predecessor, he declined to prosecute Trump and move forward with this. And so this has been something that has kind of been sitting and lingering for some time. But still, Michael Cohen is going to be the one who is going to be able to paint the picture for the jury if it gets to that point.
So, you say Michael Cohen got a slap on the wrist. What would be the typical sentence that someone would serve for his crimes?
There are a lot of different factors that go into sentencing, and then there are also a lot of mitigating factors, and the fact that he was an attorney and didn't have any prior criminal history would give him a lower level of sentencing. But there are a lot of different factors that can go into that. But what he received was at the lower end of the scale of sentencing, and so that is typically what happens when we say someone got a slap on the wrist, is when they automatically come out with the lower level of sentencing and likely had several mitigating factors that kind of worked in his favor to help him to be able to achieve that.
I also want to ask you, just bringing it back here to what's happening in Fulton County, everything that's happening in Fulton County, and if our viewers kind of haven't really followed it every step of the way, Trump's team recently filed a motion to quash that special purpose grand jury report. Remember, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis impaneled a special purpose grand jury to look into alleged campaign interference by the former president and some of his associates, and that report was released in February, and it made some suggestions, and at that time Fani Willis indicated that potential indictments would be imminent. Well then, as we were waiting for that to happen, Trump's legal team came out and said, no, we're filing a motion to quash, basically to throw that out, to make it irrelevant, and they also wanted Fani Willis and her team to be removed from this case. And then the judge earlier this week came down, Judge McBurney, came down with this order telling Fani Willis that she's got to come up with a response by May 1st, and that she's got to, decide on whether there's going to be a hearing on this matter. So it's, many would argue a delay tactic. So there's still a lot of steps to go. But bottom line, one would imagine Fani Willis still wants to indict the former president on that alleged campaign interference in the presidential election here, based out of Georgia. So how does this actual indictment impact that potential indictment? This actual indictment out of New York, how does it impact the potential indictment or indictments out of Georgia?
This will have a direct impact on it, because now we have precedent, right? We have precedent. We have a former president who has officially now been indicted. Before, it was, we were dealing with hypotheticals and possibilities. And so now that we have seen that New York has been able to successfully secure an indictment, you can likely see some very fast movement on this. The fact that the judge has ruled and given, Fani Willis a deadline to reply and get her response, and then determine whether or not she wants a hearing or whether or not she wants the judge to just make a ruling on their motions and briefs in support of their motions, is letting everybody know that there should be some decisions made relatively soon on that. So now that we have this indictment in New York, you can certainly believe that what's going to happen here in Fulton County will certainly be expedited.
It will. Okay, that's very interesting, because I wondered if it would be expedited or maybe even pushed back, because there's this other thing going on, and I also wondered, how much they would kind of inform each other, because they're two separate cases, right? And then I wondered about just kind of the appearance of impropriety if you kind of let those kind of feed into each other in any way. And let's not forget the other potential charges related to kind of the insurrection, right? So I'm just curious, just kind of big picture, how does this all play into each other?
Well, one is not necessarily contingent upon the other. And so they would be wise to still move forward here in Fulton and not wait. Because again, these are different set of facts that you're dealing with, different charges that may come down. The ones in New York are tenuous at best. They're very shaky because we don't have we can't point to it directly and say, hey, that is definitely a crime what you did. That is going to be a legal argument that the attorneys are going to have to make, and a judge is going to have to make a determination. I believe what Fani has here, with what she's alleging, is a little bit more concrete, and it has a little bit more sustainability than it does in New York. And so they should not wait, because again, what they have working in their benefit is now that we do, as of today, have this indictment. What they're going to do is possibly lose traction if his case in New York gets dismissed prior to them getting any significant movement here in Atlanta.
All right, yeah, that's very interesting. So we're going to be watching both of those cases, among other things. There's a lot going on, and it just got a lot more important. And thank you so much, Erica Wilson, Atlanta-based attorney, for joining us and giving your analysis in this breaking news that we're going to continue following. I also just want to turn to some of the reaction that we're following on Twitter. Just give me a moment here. I'm trying to just call up some of this stuff, because we when we're doing the digital broadcasting, we are multitasking. So give me a moment. I'm trying to get our Twitter feeds up so we can look at this. But for any of you that are just joining us now, what we're following is this breaking news of the former President Donald Trump being indicted in New York on charges involving payments, hush money payments made during the 2016 presidential campaign to silence claims of an extramarital affair or sexual encounter with adult film star Stormy Daniels. So this is becoming the first ever criminal case against a former U.S. president. And the timing is as Trump is bidding to retake the White House in 2024. So, it's something that could potentially have an impact on that, right? Something that we're watching really closely. It's still not clear what exactly the indictment is for. And what I mean is, it's not clear what the official criminal charges are, because this indictment was filed under a seal. We do expect the announcement to come in the next few days. So, maybe that's early next week, because, tomorrow's a Friday, so perhaps that would come early next week. And at that time, we would hope to learn what the official charges are. We have learned, Trump's attorney has said, that the arraignment would happen next week, so perhaps that's when we would learn what the official charges are. We do know that the focus of the Manhattan District Attorney has been on a felony charge of falsifying business records, and that charge carries a maximum sentence of 4 years in prison. I want to turn now to some of the reaction happening on Twitter, just that we can see. We have this tweet that we've got from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, saying, this is his reaction: the weaponization of the legal system to advance a political agenda turns the rule of law on its head. It is un-American. The Soros-backed Manhattan District Attorney has consistently bent the law to downgrade felonies and to excuse criminal misconduct. Yet now he's stretching the law to target a political opponent. Florida will not assist in an extradition request given the questionable circumstances at issue with the Soros-backed Manhattan prosecutor and his political agenda. So, clearly, on the Republican side, you've got individuals saying this is a political witch hunt. I mean, he didn't use the language political witch hunt. The political witch hunt is the language of the former president. He said, I believe this is a witch hunt, is what he said in a statement just hours ago. But clearly this is the same sentiment that we're seeing echoed here by Ron DeSantis. Now let's look at this. From Adam Schiff, saying the indictment of a former president is unprecedented, but so too is the unlawful conduct in which Trump has been engaged. A nation of laws must hold the rich and powerful accountable, even when they hold high office, especially when they do. To do otherwise is not democracy. So there you go. You got it on the other side. You're hearing from a prominent Republican. You heard from a prominent Republican. Now you're hearing from a prominent Democrat. That this is really about rule of law. This is about showing that no one is above the law. Okay, let's look at some other reaction that we are following. Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Alvin Bragg has irreparably damaged our country in an attempt to interfere in our presidential election as he routinely frees violent criminals to terrorize the public. He weaponized our sacred system of justice against President Donald Trump. The American people will not tolerate this injustice, and the House of Representatives will hold Alvin Bragg and his unprecedented abuse of power to account. So they're implying that, again, this is a political witch hunt. This prosecution, that the prosecutor's office, the prosecutor and his team were acting to target the former president. And now we want to share at this point the former president's statement that he released a short time ago. Let's read this in full. You can see it here on Twitter. So this is political persecution and election interference at the highest level in history. Again, words of the former president. From the time I came down the golden escalator at Trump Tower, and even before I was sworn in as your president of the United States, the radical left Democrats, the enemy of the hardworking men and women of this country, have been engaged in a witch hunt to destroy the Make America Great Again movement. You remember it just like I do. Russia, Russia, Russia. The Mueller hoax. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Impeachment hoax, number 1. Impeachment hoax, number 2. The illegal and unconstitutional Mar-a-Lago raid. And now this. The Democrats have lied, cheated, and stolen in their obsession with trying to get Trump. But now they've done the unthinkable, indicting a completely innocent person in an act of blatant election interference. Never before in our nation's history has this been done. The Democrats have cheated countless times over the decades, including spying on my campaign, but weaponizing our justice system to punish a political opponent who just so happens to be a president of the United States and by far the leading Republican candidate for president has never happened before, ever. Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who was handpicked and funded by George Soros, is a disgrace. Rather than stopping the unprecedented crime wave taking over New York City, he's doing Joe Biden's dirty work, ignoring the murders and burglaries and assaults he should be focused on. This is how Bragg spends his time. I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. Everyone can see it. So our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg, and then we will defeat Joe Biden. And we are going to throw every last one of these crooked Democrats out of office so we can make America great again. So obviously very, very strong reaction from the former president, Donald Trump there, and clearly stating in no uncertain language that this is a political witch hunt, that he believes that he's innocent, he believes that he's been targeted for political reasons, that this has basically been orchestrated by the Democratic Party, and really a weaponization of the criminal justice system. And then you have on the other side leading Democrats saying, look, no, this is about rule of law. This is about saying it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're the president of the United States or we're the president of the United States. Nobody's above the law, and we're going to hold people accountable. And the more powerful you are, the more important it is that we do hold you accountable. And that's really what this is about. As Erica Wilson, the Atlanta-based attorney, shared with us, if you were with us, a short time ago, she was sharing with us that hush money payments per se are not illegal in the state of New York, but what is illegal is falsifying business records. And so we do know that strategically, as a prosecutor, if you want to go after someone, you got to look for the law that it breaks. And And falsifying business records apparently has really been the focus of the Manhattan District Attorney in looking at a potential criminal charge to pursue. That is a crime that carries a sentence of up to 4 years in prison. And the argument here is that President Trump, did falsify the business records in order to make those hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, the adult film star, that he essentially gave that $130,000 to his then attorney, Michael Cohen, in order to pay Stormy Daniels, but listed it as legal fees. And that in so doing, it was falsifying business records. I apologize. I'm just a little distracted here. So thank you to Maria. Maria is working with me here on the digital desk. So we've got this statement. This is from a spokesperson. I'm sorry, Maria. Share with me what we've got.
This is from a spokesperson.
Maria, why don't you step up? You can share this. You want to talk into the microphone? Share what you got.
Yes, we just received into the newsroom Alan Bragg tweeting this, but saying this is a statement from a spokesperson, and I'm going to read this quote that we've gotten right here. This evening, we contacted Mr. Trump's attorney to coordinate his surrender to the Manhattan DA's office for arraignment on a Supreme Court indictment, now which remains under seal, by the way. Guidance will be provided when the arraignment date is selected. So a lot of information there. Again, this is on Adam Bragg's Twitter account. The statement is attributed to a spokesperson, basically saying, I'm just going to repeat just because there's a lot of developments that are coming out by the minute, and this is just one of those. Quote, this evening we contacted Mr. Trump's attorney to coordinate his surrender to the Manhattan DA's office for arraignment on a Supreme Court indictment, which remains under seal. Now, guidance will be provided when the arraignment date is selected. So that kind of tells you that we have a lot more that we're going to be following to this story. So that is the latest from all of this reaction that's been pouring in, and now coming down from Adam Bragg, obviously such a centerpiece in this, and with as you've heard from Kevin McCarthy, as you heard from other politicians, notable politicians, now a first response from the man himself, who has just been included in this discussion now at the center of this, along with the former president.
And I'm actually just pulling up this statement that you're talking about that's on Twitter, the Twitter account for the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, that Maria is referring to, saying this evening we contacted Mr. Trump's attorney to coordinate his surrender. This is the big question. He's saying guidance is going to be provided when the arraignment date is selected. So that is the question. I mean, from the attorneys of the former president, we've learned that the arraignment date is sometime next week, TBA. But that's when we're hoping to learn what the official charge is here. And, if you are just joining us, and we just want to recap, because I know people are kind of hearing about the news, and then they're tuning in and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Former President Donald Trump has been indicted. He has been indicted by a New York grand jury. So this is certainly a big deal. This is big breaking news that we're following, and it's really unprecedented. This is the first ex-president to be charged now with a crime. And all of this is related to hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels. $130,000 is what we're talking about here, being paid out during the 2016 presidential campaign in the final days of that. But, as Erica Wilson, she's an Atlanta attorney who came on here a short time ago, and she was kind of discussing with us the legality of it all. Hush money payment, paying someone hush money is not illegal in the state of New York. That's not illegal in itself. What is illegal is falsifying business records. And that's what the focus has been of Alvin Bragg, this Manhattan District Attorney, is what we know is this charge of falsifying business records. Serious felony charge, carries a sentence of up to 4 years in prison. I have to be clear, we don't know what the charge is. This indictment is under seal. We don't know what the charge is. When is that going to be unsealed? When are we going to find out? Those are some of the questions. What are the charges actually going to say? We need to see that document. We need to be able to know for sure. What we do know is what we've been able to ascertain from just following this case, from sourcing and so forth, is that this charge of falsifying business records has been a focus for the Manhattan District Attorney, and it's a serious felony that carries a 4-year prison sentence. And Michael Cohen, we do know, the former attorney for the former president, Michael Cohen, did testify against this grand jury that has put down this indictment, and he served prison time, right? He was convicted in relation to this scheme as well. So certainly, if this does go forward, if this does go to trial, he would be a key witness in this case, and he's already been a witness to this grand jury talking about this matter. And just kind of why he's important is the allegation is that the former president gave that money, the $130,000, to Michael Cohen, his lawyer, to then give to Stormy Daniels to hush her about a sexual encounter that he had with her. And then how does the criminal charge come in? Well, the argument is, well, you listed that as legal fees, as paying your attorney, but that's not legal fees. That's hush money payments. And so that's how the prosecutors can come and say, look, that's illegal. Hush money may not be illegal, but falsifying business records is illegal. We're going to prosecute you for that. We're going to try to put you away for 4 years. That's potentially how this could go. So again, right now we're just waiting for the indictment to be unsealed, to learn officially, be able to confirm what those charges are. We have learned from the attorney of the former president that he is expected to be arraigned next week. That could mean fingerprints. That could mean mugshot. That could mean potentially spending the night in jail. But based on what our analysts have shared with us, authorities are going to try to make it peaceable, try to avoid any civil unrest, try to make it amicable, because they want to avoid inflaming supporters of the former president and, inciting rallies or potentially even riots. So we're going to have to see how this goes. Certainly by next week, we would expect to learn more. And it's a major story that we're going to keep following. We encourage you to keep it right here on Atlanta News First, Atlanta News First Plus, because we are staying on top of all the breaking developments. All right, everybody. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And if you haven't done it already, please download our app because you're going to get alerts whenever anything develops on this huge story that we're following. Have a great night.